Danielle Harris barely had time to adjust the strap of her worn leather bag before the thick arm of the security guard stretched out across the entrance, blocking her path. His uniform was crisp, badge gleaming under the soft golden lights of the boutique's lavish exterior, but his expression held no welcome. His narrowed eyes scanned her from head to toe, pausing for a heartbeat too long at the modest, faded coat wrapped around her shoulders. Without saying a word, his body language alone screamed that she didn't belong here. Inside the store, chandeliers sparkled like a constellation of stars, casting warm, inviting glows over rows of designer garments and glass displays filled with luxury accessories. The scent of high-end perfume lingered in the air, subtle yet unmistakable. Shoppers moved gracefully between displays, their polished shoes clicking softly against the marble floor, their expensive fabrics brushing gently as they passed one another. Conversations, once casual and lively, tapered into hushed murmurs, the moment eyes turned toward the entrance. Danielle felt every gaze as if it pressed weight onto her shoulders, yet her posture remained composed. Her back straightened instinctively, chin slightly lifted. She wasn't wearing the armor of wealth like the rest, but there was a quiet confidence in her bearing, as if she carried something far heavier than diamonds in her heart. The judgment in the air was sharp, almost tangible, and she could hear the whispered remarks slipping through the crowd like cracks in a dam. "Who let her in here?" a voice muttered, laced with contempt. "Probably lost," another scoffed softly, not bothering to lower their voice. Clearing his throat with exaggerated annoyance, the security guard finally spoke, his tone edged with false politeness. "Ma'am, store policy requires appointments for consultations with our fashion advisors." The emphasis on appointments came with a glance at her scuffed shoes, his eyes betraying the implication that someone like her couldn't possibly have one. Danielle met his gaze, unflinching. Her voice, smooth and steady, carried no trace of offense. "I'm not here for a consultation," she replied, her tone quiet yet firm. Her eyes, deep brown with flecks of determination, momentarily drifted past the guard's shoulder to the elegant logo etched above the entrance. A flicker of recognition flashed in her expression, quick, almost imperceptible, but enough to hint at a familiarity far beyond that of an ordinary customer. The guard's jaw tightened, sensing something he couldn't quite place. "Regardless, we have certain expectations for our clientele," he continued, voice clipped as he squared his shoulders. His words hung in the air like dust motes caught in sunlight, each syllable carefully chosen to maintain a veneer of professionalism while barely concealing the underlying prejudice. A slight crease formed at the corner of Danielle's lips. Not quite a smile, but close. "Expectations," she echoed softly, almost to herself, as if tasting the word before letting it go. There was no anger in her reply, only a quiet knowing. Their exchange had drawn the attention of more shoppers now, who paused mid-purchase or conversation to watch the scene unfold. Some peered over racks of tailored suits, others clutched handbags worth more than a year's rent for most. Eyes full of curiosity, but not kindness. They watched, perhaps expecting her to back down, to retreat into the shadows from where they believed she had emerged. Before she could respond further, the click of polished shoes approached from within the store. A man in a tailored navy suit, the manager no doubt, stepped forward with a practiced smile that never reached his eyes. He gave the security guard a brief nod of approval before turning to Danielle with thinly veiled condescension. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, though his gaze didn't wait for an answer. He had already decided what the problem was. Danielle met his look with the same quiet composure. "No problem," she answered evenly, but the undercurrent in her voice suggested otherwise. The manager's eyes narrowed slightly, sizing her up as if calculating her worth on an invisible scale of status. "Perhaps you're looking for our outlet branch?" he offered. His suggestion dipped in mock helpfulness, knowing full well the insult it carried. Danielle didn't flinch. Her eyes briefly brushed the store's monogram display behind him, then returned to meet his stare, unwavering. There was no need for her to explain herself, and she chose not to. Silence stretched between them for a heartbeat too long, thick with unsaid words and assumptions, before the manager finally shifted his weight, clearly expecting her to leave. But Danielle didn't move. The manager's gaze lingered on Danielle, his brows knitting together in slight annoyance as he studied her. "Miss," he began, his voice smooth but laced with quiet dismissal, "this establishment carries exclusive collections, tailored pieces, handcrafted accessories. I'm not sure this is what you're looking for." His words dripped with polite insult, a carefully constructed sentence that told her she was out of place without ever saying it directly. Danielle's posture didn't falter. She straightened her shoulders just a touch more, her eyes steady on his, voice calm and even. "I am well aware of the collections this house carries," she replied, her tone composed but carrying an unmistakable edge of quiet pride. "I would like to browse." Her simple, dignified response seemed to irritate the manager further, as if her refusal to shrink back was an affront in itself. His lips tightened into a forced smile, but before he could speak, a ripple of murmurs spread through the nearby customers. A well-dressed woman, clutching a handbag adorned with gold chains, scoffed under her breath. "Browse," she sneered, loud enough for others to hear. "Does she even know the price tags in this place?" Another man, draped in an overcoat, so fine it practically shimmered, chuckled as he exchanged a knowing glance with the woman. "Maybe she's here for window shopping," he quipped, causing a small ripple of laughter to spread like a crackling ember catching fire. Danielle caught the remarks but didn't let them penetrate her calm exterior. Inwardly, though, she felt the familiar burn of old wounds, echoes of past moments where her worth had been measured in glances, in whispered judgments, in assumptions made before she could speak. Memories of long nights working double shifts, saving every penny while sketching designs by candlelight, flickered through her mind like shadows on a wall. She had climbed mountains these people couldn't even imagine. Yet here she stood, facing the same dismissive eyes she had vowed never to fear. The manager shifted his weight, folding his arms across his chest, as if to seal off any avenue of respect. "Perhaps," he said slowly, tilting his head with mock consideration, "you would feel more comfortable at our seasonal sale venue a few blocks down. More accessible options," he added, as though offering her charity. Danielle's gaze remained locked on him, steady and unreadable. Her eyes drifted momentarily to a display behind him, where a silk dress hung, its stitching precise, the cut impeccable. "That dress," she noted casually, as though she were speaking to a peer rather than someone questioning her right to exist in the space, "is inspired by Laurent's 1968 collection, isn't it? The asymmetrical neckline, the bias-cut silk, it's a direct homage." Her observation sliced clean through the air, catching both the manager and a few nearby staff members off guard. A young sales assistant, barely out of training, blinked in surprise and glanced at the dress, then at Danielle. He opened his mouth, as if to confirm her claim, but quickly closed it under the manager's withering glare. The manager's smile faltered just a fraction, a hairline crack in his otherwise polished demeanor. "You're familiar with our designers," he said, his tone struggling between curiosity and irritation. "I know fashion," Danielle replied simply, her voice carrying a quiet assurance that could not be faked. The security guard, who had remained silently imposing at her side, glanced between her and the manager, visibly unsure of how to proceed. The balance of the moment teetered, as if some unseen weight had shifted, making them briefly question their assumptions. From the cluster of watching customers, another snide comment arose. "Probably memorized it from a magazine," the well-dressed woman muttered, her voice sharp with disdain. "Doesn't mean she can afford it." Danielle let the insult roll off her like rain off a well-made coat. She allowed herself a small, almost imperceptible breath before speaking again. "Actually," she said, letting her gaze drift across the opulent store with familiarity, "I have an appointment nearby shortly. A meeting, just around the corner." Her words, casual yet deliberate, sent a slight ripple through the gathering crowd. The manager's eyes narrowed just a touch. "A meeting?" he echoed, skepticism thick in his voice. "Yes," Danielle confirmed, her tone even. "With some associates in the district." There was a brief beat of silence before someone in the crowd chuckled darkly. "I'm sure," the man in the shimmering overcoat replied, drawing out his words with mock approval, as though humoring a child's fantasy. Another customer, emboldened by the moment, added, "Perhaps it's tea with the king while she's at it." Laughter rolled through the space again, but Danielle stood steady, her expression unchanged. She had faced storms far greater than this chorus of shallow ridicule. She met the manager's gaze one final time, her eyes clear and unwavering, then turned gracefully away from the entrance. As she stepped back, the crowd watched her with a mix of smug satisfaction and lingering curiosity. There was something about her composure, the quiet certainty in her bearing, that left a faint trace of doubt in their minds. She didn't argue, didn't plead. She simply walked away, her presence lingering like the final note of a song that left listeners unsettled and curious about the melody they hadn't fully understood. Morning light spilled across the polished storefront as the boutique prepared for another day of curated luxury. Staff moved with rehearsed precision, straightening displays and aligning merchandise with exacting care. The air held its usual fragrance of exclusivity, a delicate blend of high-end perfumes and quiet superiority. Then, the door swung open. Danielle stepped through first, her stride unhurried but unmistakably purposeful. This time, she was not alone. Flanking her were two sharply dressed executives, both carrying an air of command that could not be mistaken for anything less than authority. Behind them, a third figure followed, tablet in hand, checking notes with practiced efficiency. The quiet murmur of store preparations stilled almost instantly as all eyes turned toward the entrance. The security guard, once so confident in his gatekeeping, froze mid-step. His face, rigid and pale, betrayed a flicker of confusion as recognition began to dawn. His gaze darted from Danielle to the suited professionals beside her, then back to Danielle again, as if trying to piece together a puzzle whose image had, suddenly, impossibly, changed. The store manager emerged from a side hallway, his expression tight with routine control, but it faltered the moment he saw her. His eyes narrowed, trying to maintain composure, though a slight tremor betrayed him. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came at first. Instead, there was only the ambient sound of whispers spreading like wildfire among the staff. "Who is she?" a sales associate breathed, barely above a whisper. "I thought she was just some random shopper yesterday," another replied, the disbelief evident in her tone. The manager straightened his jacket, forcing professionalism back into his posture. He stepped forward, clearing his throat. "Miss," he began, then hesitated, unsure of how to address her now. Gone was the casual dismissal from the day before, replaced by a cautious, almost wary tone. Danielle's gaze swept the room, her expression calm, her presence commanding. She let the silence linger just long enough for discomfort to settle fully, over the staff and curious onlookers gathering at a distance. Then, with the quiet confidence of someone deeply familiar with power, she spoke. "My name," she said, her voice measured and clear, "is Danielle Harris. As of this morning, I am the majority shareholder of this brand." The words landed like a thunderclap in the pristine boutique. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Faces shifted from skepticism to stunned realization. Mouths parted slightly, but no sound escaped. Even the manager's well-rehearsed expressions of control deserted him, as his eyes widened in shock. Danielle continued, her tone composed, free of gloating yet rich with quiet strength. "Yesterday I was here to observe," she explained, letting her gaze drift deliberately toward the manager and the security guard. "Today, I am here to lead." The security guard's face drained of color. His eyes dropped to the floor, and he took an almost imperceptible step back, as though distance might shield him from the weight of his prior actions. The manager swallowed hard, searching for a response that could salvage his crumbling authority. I wasn't aware," he stammered, voice tight. Danielle's eyes met his with steady calm. "No," she replied evenly. "You weren't." Her team stood quietly behind her, not needing to speak. Their presence alone amplified the gravity of the moment. They carried binders, tablets, and portfolios that signified decisions made far above the manager's pay grade. The staff, once dismissive, now looked on with wide eyes, understanding too late the mistake they had made. From across the room, one of the younger sales assistants shifted awkwardly, her gaze dropping to the floor. Embarrassment, sharp and raw, colored her cheeks. She had been among those who had laughed the day before, joining in the quiet ridicule that had now turned to silent regret. Danielle's eyes softened slightly as she noticed, but she kept her focus steady. This moment was not about revenge. It was about revelation. "I understand," she said, addressing the room, "that assumptions are easily made. Appearances are deceiving. But let today serve as a reminder. True value is not worn on the surface." Her words carried across the boutique like a quiet decree. No anger, no shouting. Just clear, unshakable authority. Whispers of acknowledgement rippled through the staff. A few exchanged glances that mingled shame with a dawning respect. The very people who had doubted her now struggled to reconcile the woman before them with the assumptions they had so casually formed. The manager attempted to recover, straightening his posture. "Miss Harris," he began, his voice a shade too eager, We look forward to your guidance." Danielle gave a slight nod, acknowledging him but not offering easy absolution. Her gaze moved over the displays, the pristine counters, the mannequins dressed in fabrics she could identify without even glancing at the labels. She took in every corner of the store not with the eyes of a visitor, but with the discerning vision of an owner. She walked deeper into the boutique, her steps confident and unhurried, her executive team following seamlessly. The air in the room had shifted entirely from superiority to silent deference. Her presence now commanded attention, not suspicion. Where once there had been mockery, now there was awe. Danielle allowed her fingers to brush lightly over a silk scarf displayed near the entrance, feeling the texture beneath her fingertips as though reacquainting herself with an old acquaintance. Her eyes lingered on the intricate pattern, a quiet smile playing at the corners of her lips. Without a word, she continued her slow, assured walk through the store, every step erasing the memory of the day before and writing a new chapter in its place. The private conference room inside the boutique felt far removed from the polished showroom floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows welcomed the soft glow of daylight, casting long shadows across the sleek table where the management team now sat, their previous confidence worn thin. Danielle took her seat at the head of the table, poised and calm, her executives settling quietly beside her. Papers were arranged neatly before them, though Danielle hardly needed to glance at them. She had been preparing for this moment long before today. The manager sat opposite her, his posture tense, hands folded tightly as though bracing for a storm. The security guard who had once blocked her path stood at the far end of the room, eyes cast downward. No longer the imposing figure he had tried to be. Several other senior staff members filled the remaining chairs, their faces marked with a blend of uncertainty and quiet remorse. Danielle's gaze swept across them, meeting each of their eyes without malice. "We're not here for retribution," she began, her voice even, carrying the steady weight of leadership. "We're here for accountability." A hush settled over the room, heavier than any accusation. The manager cleared his throat, a nervous reflex, but Danielle held his gaze. steady and unblinking. "Your handling of guests," she continued, her words deliberate, "reflects not only on this store, but on the entire brand. The culture we cultivate begins here." One of the senior assistants shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "Miss Harris," she began, her voice edged with genuine regret. "We misjudged you. I misjudged you." Her eyes lowered as she spoke, the weight of her admission pulling her shoulders inward. Danielle gave a subtle nod, acknowledging the honesty in the moment. "You misjudged more than me," she replied gently. "You misjudged what this brand should represent?" With a quiet motion, she signaled to one of her executives, who slid a folder across the table to the manager. He hesitated before opening it, scanning the pages within. His face paled as he read the immediate policy changes outlined clearly in black and white. Anti-discrimination protocols, mandatory inclusivity training, a restructuring of staff hierarchies, to reflect a more diverse leadership. His eyes flicked back to Danielle, uncertain whether to speak. "The brand's future," she said, addressing the whole room, "belongs to those who believe in accessibility and respect. Our clients, regardless of appearance, deserve dignity the moment they step through our doors." A flicker of genuine understanding crossed the manager's face. "It won't happen again," he murmured, though the words sounded more like a hope than a promise. "It cannot happen again," Danielle corrected, her tone unwavering but not cruel. Outside the glass walls of the conference room, staff members had gathered quietly, watching the proceedings with rapt attention. Word had already spread of Danielle's ownership, and now they witnessed a transformation unfolding before their eyes. No longer was the power in whispers and quiet judgments. The power had shifted into the hands of leadership that demanded better. The security guard finally spoke, his voice low and rough around the edges. I'm sorry," he said, each word feeling pulled from somewhere deep within. "I should have treated you with respect from the start." Danielle's expression softened just slightly, enough to show that his apology was received, though not easily earned. "Apologies," she said, "matter only when they're followed by action." He nodded solemnly, understanding fully what she meant. A thoughtful silence filled the room as Danielle allowed the weight of her words to settle. She took a breath, steady and slow, her eyes drifting toward the cityscape visible beyond the window. In this moment, she felt the echoes of her younger self. The girl who had sketched designs at night by the dim light of street lamps, who had been told time and again that her dreams were too ambitious, too far-fetched. She had carried those scars silently, and now, in this very room, they transformed into something far more powerful: purpose. Turning her attention back to the table, she continued, "We will expand our reach," she announced, her voice firm with vision. "New initiatives to make this brand accessible to underserved communities, scholarships for aspiring designers from diverse backgrounds, partnerships with community organizations. We will not only change the way this store operates, we will change the industry." Her declaration sent a ripple through the staff, observing, from beyond the glass, a visible shift in posture and expression. Skepticism softened into admiration, derision into respect. The manager, finding his voice again, nodded slowly. "Miss Harris," he said carefully, "your leadership, it's what this place needs." Danielle met his gaze, not with triumph, but with clarity. "It's what this place deserves," she corrected softly. Around the table, her executives took notes, already preparing to implement her vision. The senior staff, some humbled, some inspired, recognized the change sweeping through the room like a fresh wind. It was not a purge, not a vendetta. It was evolution, a long overdue realignment of values. Outside the boutique's windows, the city continued its rhythm, unaware of the quiet revolution taking place within. But those inside felt it deeply. The customers who had once mocked Danielle now glanced toward the conference room with something that resembled admiration, even reverence. They saw not just a woman who had risen above their prejudices, but a leader reshaping the very institution they had upheld. Danielle rose from her seat, signaling the close of the meeting. Her eyes lingered once more on the faces around her, no longer adversaries but perhaps future allies. She offered a final word, not as a threat, but as a promise. "We rise," she said, her voice carrying the conviction of every step she had taken to reach this point. "When we lift others with us." And with that, she left the table, walking through the glass doors, with the quiet assurance of a woman who knew exactly where she belonged. The late afternoon sunlight poured through the grand windows of Danielle's new office, casting a warm glow over the refined space that now belonged to her. The polished mahogany desk gleamed under the light, flanked by carefully selected pieces of art that spoke to both heritage and ambition. Yet, despite the beauty of her surroundings, her gaze was not fixed on the grandeur. Instead, she stood, quietly by the window, looking out over the city that had once felt so distant, so unreachable. Her reflection stared back at her from the glass, not just the woman she had become, but the echoes of the young girl she once was. The girl who had stood outside this very store years ago, clutching a worn portfolio of sketches, her heart filled with both hope and fear. She could still remember the way her palms had sweated as she waited for an appointment that would never happen, the way the receptionist had glanced at her with thinly veiled pity before telling her, without even looking at her work, that the brand wasn't seeking new designers at this time. That rejection had stung deeply, carving itself into her memory like an old scar. She had walked away that day with her head held high, but inside, something had cracked. Still, she had refused to let that moment define her. Quietly, relentlessly, she had built herself up from that disappointment, layering her dreams with grit and her ambitions with patience. Now, standing at the pinnacle of her journey, she allowed herself a rare moment of reflection. "Thank you," she whispered under her breath, not to anyone in the room, but to the younger version of herself who had chosen perseverance over surrender. Her lips curled into a soft, almost private smile, eyes glistening with a quiet sense of victory that required no audience. The door to her office clicked open, and her executive team entered, carrying folders filled with plans and projections for the future. They moved with purpose, their respect for her evident in every gesture. One of her lead advisors, a sharp-eyed woman named Marissa, approached with a confident stride, her tone energized. "We've finalized the proposal for the mentorship program," she said. "We can begin outreach to underrepresented communities by next quarter." Danielle turned from the window, her expression warming. "Good," she replied, her voice steady with conviction. "Let's make sure it's not just a program on paper. I want real opportunities, real change." Marissa nodded firmly. "We'll prioritize schools, local art centers, community initiatives. We'll find the talent that's been overlooked." Another executive chimed in, his voice laced with enthusiasm. "And the design incubator you envisioned? We've identified locations for workshops. Emerging designers can learn from industry leaders, develop collections, and be given a platform right here in our flagship store." Danielle's eyes lit with genuine pride. "Perfect," she said softly. "Let them walk through these doors, as creators, not just customers." As her team continued outlining their plans, Danielle listened intently, her mind weaving each detail into the larger tapestry of transformation she had envisioned. The brand was evolving, not merely expanding its market, but reshaping its very soul. This was no longer a place of exclusion, cloaked in luxury. It was becoming a space of welcome, of opportunity, of new beginnings. "I want open submissions," Danielle added thoughtfully, her gaze moving between her executives. "No more closed circles, no more gatekeeping. Talent should never be judged by who someone knows, or how they dress, or where they come from." Her words resonated deeply with the room, drawing nods of agreement. The atmosphere carried a quiet but undeniable energy, a shared sense that they were building something far greater than a business strategy. They were rewriting a narrative. As the meeting drew to a close, Danielle's attention lingered on a final detail presented by Marissa, an upcoming event to unveil the new vision of the brand to the public. Danielle considered it carefully, then allowed a subtle smile to play at her lips. "Let's host it here," she decided. "In this very store." Marissa's eyebrows rose in pleasant surprise. "Here?" Danielle nodded. "There's poetry in it," she replied. "The same space that once turned people away will now open its doors to welcome them in." The room seemed to breathe as one, the weight of her words settling into their hearts like seeds ready to bloom. Outside, beyond the tall windows, passers-by moved along the busy sidewalks, many unaware of the quiet revolution unfolding behind the glass. Yet even from a distance a few of them glanced upward, catching sight of Danielle through the window. Where once there had been suspicion and dismissal, there was now curiosity and, for some, admiration. The transformation was not just within the walls of the boutique. It had begun to ripple outward, touching lives and perceptions beyond what could be seen. Danielle felt it in the air, in the hopeful glances exchanged among her team, in the subtle shifts of posture from the staff who had once looked through her as though she were invisible. She exhaled slowly, her heart full but grounded. This victory was not about proving them wrong. It was about proving to herself, and to every person who had ever been underestimated, that dignity and resilience could carry you further than prejudice ever could. Her story was not one of revenge, but of quiet triumph. "We rise," she had said earlier, and now she believed it more deeply than ever. Not by stepping over others, but by lifting them with us. As her team gathered their materials and prepared to step out for the next phase of their mission, Danielle lingered by the window one last time. She allowed herself a final glance at the world beyond, not as a woman looking in, but as a leader looking out. Her voice, soft but certain, broke the silence. "Let's make this a brand that people believe in," she said, more to herself than anyone else. "Not just for what we sell, but for what we stand for." And with that, Danielle Harris turned from the window, her steps purposeful, her vision clear. She didn't need the validation of those who once doubted her. She carried her own light, bright enough to illuminate not only her path but the paths of countless others who would one day follow.